banana phone.
So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Julia Lothrop. My maiden name is Lodenberg, which is German, and I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, and lived most of my life in Little Rock, Arkansas. I was my mother was raised in Arkansas and lived there her whole life, and so was my grandmother on her side. And then my dad was from East St. Louis, Illinois. So, and they met when my father came to Arkansas to work at Alcoa, which is the Aluminum Company of America. My dad was a chemical engineer for about 45 years with Alcoa.
Wow. And did he ever work on any big projects?
Oh yeah, he was the chief chemical engineer for Alcoa at several of their plants, including the one in Arkansas, which was actually based outside of Little Rock in a town called Bauxite, which ironically, bauxite is the mineral that they use to make aluminum. So that's the iron ore that they use for making aluminum. So he was the chief chemical engineer for them, and when I was a little girl, like from kindergarten, when I was in kindergarten through second grade, we lived in a town in South Texas called Port Lavaca, which is just south of Corpus Christi. And while we were down there, he was part of the management team in charge of putting in a chlorine plant down there, because chlorine was important to some of the processes that they use for making aluminum. So he was part of the team that helped establish that plant that is still in operation in Port Lavaca to this day. So,
wow. So did you have any brothers and sisters growing up?
I did. I had one older sister, and she's married, and she lives out in Sacramento, California now. And then she had a son and a daughter. And so her son lives in Little Rock still. And then her daughter recently married and lives in El Paso, Texas.
Okay, so what did your mother do as you grew up?
My mother, when she was single, before she married my dad, worked at the Arkansas Department of Health. She was a lab technician there. Her father, my grandfather, was one of the management people who worked at the Arkansas Department of Health, and his role was to inspect milk. And so he was in charge of all of the milk inspections throughout the state and ensuring that the cows were not ill. And so he was in charge of ensuring that the milk that was provided for the citizens of Arkansas was safe. And so he often traveled the state and tested the milk. And so when my sister and I were growing up, one of the things that we used to like to do was he had these really, really long straws. I don't know if you've ever seen those wax kind of paper straws. Now most of the straws are plastic. But he had these really long, like 4-foot long, skinny straws. And what he would do was he would go to these big vats at like the various dairy companies. So like here in Dallas, like he would go to like if he were in Dallas, he would have gone to Shep's, say, or Oak Farms. and he would go and, siphon some of the milk using those straws out of those vats, and then, put them in various containers to take them back to the health department for testing. And so, of course, being little girls, my sister and I used to always get into his long straws and play with them and, put them in our hair. And I'm sure he didn't like us doing that, but we were always kind of messing around with his equipment. So,
So, did your father work on any projects that were involved in World
oh,
War
I'm
II?
sorry. And getting back to your original question, after my mother worked at the health department, she married, and then after she had children, she was a housewife. She didn't work. So.
Okay. So, did Jack Laudenberg, your father, work on any projects that were involved in World War II?
Right. My dad, his real name, given name, was John Leo Laudenberg, and everybody called him Jack. But he served, as many in his generation served in World War II, and he ended up working on the atomic bomb project. And so he was one of the people who analyzed the data. So, as I understand it, when they would detonate the bomb and all that, he would help analyze a lot of the data from the bomb. So he was actually one of the people. They tested the bomb on Bikini Island, which is actually where bikinis, the swimsuit, came from, I guess. And so he was actually on the island when they were testing it, and then he would help analyze the data and all of that. And he ultimately, was part of his engineering training from Purdue and all of that. He ended up going and getting his education through the GI Bill, like a lot of people did. But he was on Bikini Island, and then he ended up in Washington, D.C. With the Army as they worked and studied, the results of the atomic bomb before they actually used it over in Japan to help in the war. So
That's pretty cool.
yeah, it helped in the war, but it was detrimental to many people and families, and so.
Speaking of families, during your school, when you were younger and in school, how was your school experience?
How was my school experience in Arkansas?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Little Rock schools in the 1950s were the site of, with Governor Faubus, the civil rights demonstrations, and when Little Rock tried to desegregate the schools, there was a lot of turmoil, and the National Guard was brought in, and all of that. So there is partly, I guess, as a result of that, we ended up with a lot of federal oversight of our schools, and so Arkansas, or Little Rock schools in particular, desegregation was a primary focus of our educational priorities in our school system. And so my public school education was, we were,
Daisy.
pardon our cat. He was crazy. And yes, my childhood did involve having one really big fat cat, but that's another story. So So the school systems, we were desegregated, and as a part of doing that, we were bused from one end of town to the other. So for me to get from my house to like my junior high school, for instance, I had to ride a bus 45 minutes one way from the west end of town all the way to the east end of town. To get to my school, and the same going home. So it was a interesting circumstance. So, if you got sick, it wasn't, a matter of your mom, bounding around the corner to come pick you up. She had a 45-minute drive to come pick you up. My middle school, it was an interesting time. I think it was still amazingly, in the 60s and 70s, it was still somewhat turbulent. I mean, we had lots of fights at my middle school, some fights in junior high school, you know. By high school, things seemed to have settled down, somewhat. But, you know, uh, we were going to school during the gasoline crisis under President Nixon, so there was a shortage of gasoline, and because of that, we didn't change our clocks. I remember, and so there was no uh, falling back of the time, in the fall, I guess, and so we were at the bus stop, like in the dark, and we would get to school in the dark, and that was to save energy because gas prices were so high, and when you would go sometimes to get gas at the gas stations, you would have to wait in line, and the trucks were all waiting in line because there just wasn't enough gas. And so because of that, and because Arkansas, uh, under the federal courts, we were required to bus in order to desegregate, in order to try to have enough Caucasian and African American students equally balanced in our schools. A lot of our school resources went to gas money, and so at that time we were sharing books. There wasn't enough money for books and things like that because so much of our resources were going to gas. But I look back on those days, and I'm really very thankful for the opportunity to have gone to desegregated schools because I feel like I learned so much. I feel like, um, you know, um, I don't, I don't really have a fear of people of other cultures, and I remember when I went to college, and I went to visit with some friends of mine. Um, I went to some high school games with some friends of mine in college, and I was amazed at how segregated some of these other high schools were in other states. And I was just very grateful that I'd had the opportunity to have gotten to know other people and other cultures, and I just feel like it really broadened my experience, and I think it was probably difficult at the time, but I'm really very grateful to have had that opportunity.
So, speaking of college, which college did you go to, and what experiences did you have there?
Well, I ended up going to Baylor University in Waco, Texas. A lot of my friends went to the University of Arkansas. I, for some reason, decided that I didn't want to follow the crowd and go up to Fayetteville to go to school.
Rebel.
Yes, I decided I needed to do something a little bit different and explore the world a little further. So I ended up going to Baylor. It was a very friendly campus. Much to my father's delight, it was the second cheapest private school in the country at the time that I went. So I went there and thoroughly enjoyed my time there. Felt that I had gotten a very good education. I studied, got a bachelor's degree in sociology, probably not a smart degree choice. And then got a master's degree in gerontology because I enjoy working with elderly people and have been fortunate to have been able to use that degree. I left college, did an internship with AARP, and I was able to then be the director of the Southwest Society on Aging, which was a regional nonprofit organization for people who work with older adults. I left that position and worked on a National Institute of Health Alzheimer's Disease Research Center grant over at UT Southwestern and worked with the Alzheimer's Center for 10 years. And then since then I've worked for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, either with the Office of the Regional Director or with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So I've been very blessed and able to use my gerontology degree and continue to work either in policy or in fields that have some relationship with working with the elderly.
So have you worked on any big projects lately?
Well, funny you should mention that. Actually, yes. The position I'm in now, I work in the office of the secretary. We have a Dallas regional office with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and we are in full swing of implementing the Affordable Care Act, as we call it, which is affectionately known by many people as Obamacare. So we are working with the states and with educating the public and with our other federal partners and community stakeholders to make sure that people are fully informed and aware of their opportunity to go online at healthcare.gov this fall, beginning in October. They'll be able to go to healthcare.gov and look at the various health insurance plans that are available to them. And if they choose to enroll in a health insurance plan, they can choose one and enroll. And for certain people, there will be tax subsidies, so their premiums will be reduced, and some people may not even have to pay a premium depending on their income. So, and then also many small businesses will have the opportunity to offer health insurance to their employees, which they have not had that opportunity to do before. And then prior to that, a few years back, I was able to, fortunate to be on a team to have helped implement the Medicare Part D, which is what essentially is a prescription drug program for Medicare.
So before we end the interview, would you like to tell us a little bit about any fun experiences, like pranks you did in college or your friends did?
Katie, honestly, pranks we did in college. I have told you way too much about my past. One prank should have been something about a cat and getting rid of the cat. Well, let's see.
There's so many, you just can't choose.
I know Katie likes the prank stories, so let's see. One prank somebody pulled on us in college was my roommate and I were in our room, and over and over again, people kept knocking on our door, and we would go to our door in our dorm room, and we would open the door, and people would say, "Here are our newspapers." And we'd go, "Okay," and we'd close the door, and we're like, why are they handing us their newspapers? And then another person, knock, 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 and we'd open the door. Here's our newspapers. Good luck. And we're like, okay. And then knock, and somebody else would hand us, their newspaper. And finally, somebody handed us the newspaper. They're like, "How are the puppies?" And we're like, "What are you talking about? And why is everybody?" Well, there's a sign in the stairwell that said, "Take your newspapers to room 212 because they have puppies and they need all the newspapers they can get." So that was one prank. So you all might want to do that if you ever are in a dorm. That was one thing. Another thing we did was my roommate left town. It was always a dangerous thing in our dorm if you left town for the weekend, because when you came back, you never knew what to expect. And so my roommate just decided to go visit her cousin in Houston for the weekend. And when she came back, she found that her whole side of the room was essentially set up in the hallway. So her bed, her pictures were hung on the wall. Her table, her alarm clock, pretty much everything she was, she rounded the corner, and there was essentially her side of the room out in the hallway waiting for her for Monday morning. So, she came back Sunday, and there was everything out in the hall. That was probably not a good thing to do. And then someone else, two girls left town on the weekend one time, and back to the newspaper thing, I remember quite a few of us decided to take a bunch of the school newspapers and wad them up and pretty much filled their whole room with newspapers. Pretty much it was like waist high. So when they opened the door, it was just like all came out, and so they really didn't think it was that funny because they had to clean it out and they probably had to study. And I don't know. Y'all probably shouldn't do things like this when you're in college. So, okay, I'm not going to talk anymore.
Okay. Well, thank you for the interview.
Yes, you're very welcome.